Top 5 most cruel and unusual torture methods. Tell me, do you think punishments enforced by the law today are more inhumane than those of ancient times? Hey guys, you're watching History of Torture, and today we'll be discussing some of the most cruel and unusual torture methods throughout history. So let's get into it. The boot. The boot torture method was primarily used during the 16th century and involved the use of a wooden lever-arm device. In this harrowing torture method, victims were tied in a standing position while their feet were bound to the lever arm. As the lever arm was raised, it forced victims up on their toes, stretching them until they faced extreme pain or even death due to dislocation or broken bones. This form of torture was also known as the Spanish boot, as it had reportedly been employed by the Spanish Inquisition. It was also believed to be used against British convicts who had committed crimes in North America, but research has found no concrete evidence of its use there. Regardless, its effects were undoubtedly horrific and can be attributed to the sheer brutality that was once used as a method of punishment. So yeah, that was really a thing in the earlier days of humanity. Treating human beings as if they are rubber bands and stretching them until they break. But the crimes they committed to get such a punishment were on par with it. This punishment was generally directed at those who were hardcore criminals. Looting and killing innocent civilians has been an offense since time immemorial, and their punishments were to be public as well, so that no one would dare to do such a thing ever again. There is a fun fact related to this punishment though. The machine designed to perform this gruesome act had many design flaws, and its practical use shed light on them. This mechanism would malfunction a multitude of times, and that would create a clumsy and terrifying result. Sometimes, while stretching the human's body, the spring would just tighten itself, tearing the body into two parts. Other times, the spring would split off. This would result in the immediate compression of the body attached to it. You must be thinking right now that that's all, right? Well, no. At times, the tightening gear, which would keep the body in place, would just edge off to some skin, which in turn, instead of stretching the body, it would peel the skin off the victim. Now, that's real cruel, and the level of gore is just too much to digest. And people used to watch this? People in the earlier times were definitely strange. So, tell us, are you enjoying yourself? Well, if you are, we would like you to hit the subscribe button just a little bit. Just push it way down until all the red pours out of it and it turns gray. Boiling alive. One of the cruelest methods of execution used throughout history is the boiling method. This form of torture involves suspending the person over a cauldron of boiling liquid, usually water or tar. In some cases, however, heated rocks were also thrown into the boiling liquid to increase its intensity. The victim was then lowered into the vat until they died from exhaustion or heat stroke. This horrific form of torture was used in ancient societies to punish criminals as well as political opponents. It was also used during certain wars and when certain prisoners were deemed too dangerous for a traditional execution. Boiling someone alive is the worst thing anyone can do. It's against the very core of basic humanity. Although there are some people who definitely do deserve such a punishment. Rapists, pedophiles, and human traffickers, to name a few. You'll be surprised to know that in earlier times, though, this torture method was primarily used on spies from other countries, and in some Gulf countries, it is still being used for those who commit acts of harassment against women. Drawing and quartering. Drawing and quartering was a particularly brutal and painful form of punishment, and it was often carried out in public to serve as a deterrent to others. Today, it is widely considered to be a brutal form of torture and is illegal in most countries. This method of torture and execution was typically meant for high-level treason. This punishment originated in England during the medieval ages as a way to punish traitors, those who committed treason against the king. This heinous form of torture included 4 different stages: strangling, disembowelment, beheading, and dismemberment. First comes drawing, or strangling. In this, the victim was tied to a horse and dragged through the streets to the place of execution. Now, while the victim was dragged, so by the time they reached the execution area, they were covered in blood. Next comes hanging. In this, the victim was hanged by the neck to suffer, but not until they were dead. However, sometimes they would keep hanging there until their neck broke due to their body weight suffocating them. Could you imagine such a horrible fate? Sometimes their vocal cords would spring out of their throat and would create a very gory scene. That is quite sad. In the next step, the victim's genitalia was cut off and burned right in front of them, and later the victim's abdomen was cut open and their internal organs were removed. So the person doesn't just have to be dragged and experience near death, but also watch his internal organs and genitalia taken out of their body and watch them burn. This just doesn't end. Now it is time for the last and final act, and that is quartering. In this, the victim's body was divided into 4 parts. They tie the victim's limbs with 4 ropes to 4 horses, and then they are pulled in all 4 directions. Each quarter was displayed in a public place as a warning to others. White torture. The 4th torture method that we will look at is known as the white torture technique. This is a particularly cruel form of psychological torture that has been used in various countries around the world. It involves keeping someone in complete isolation with no access to light, sound, bedding, or clothing. This form of torture often leads to the breakdown of both mental and physical health, with many prisoners suffering from extreme psychological conditions and insomnia. Another form of white torture is sleep deprivation, which involves keeping the victim awake for extended periods of time. This can lead to physical exhaustion and mental deterioration, leading to severe anxiety and depression. The effects of this torture can last for years after the victim is released from captivity. Being lonely is already a big enough punishment, but to absolutely keep someone in the dark until they lose their mind is quite diabolical. In earlier days, this punishment was used to those who committed crimes that were unforgivable at any cost. Crushed by elephants. One of the most barbaric methods of torture used throughout history is being crushed by elephants as a torture method. This method was first used in India against rebels and enemies of the rulers. The execution involved tying the victim to an elephant and then having the elephant force its weight down on the victim, crushing them. It was thought that this method induced fear and therefore discouraged rebellion. The process of being crushed by elephants was one of extreme agony and suffering. It was slow, painful, and public, with onlookers gathering to watch as victims were killed in horrific ways. The physical destruction caused by this torture often resulted in death, but sometimes those who survived were left with serious physical and psychological injuries that lasted a lifetime. This form of punishment and execution was considered particularly unusual due to the intense physical pain and suffering it inflicted and the psychological trauma caused by being trampled by such a large and powerful animal. We are certain that your heartbeat starts increasing just imagining this type of situation, and you can't even imagine how much pain it caused the criminals in such a situation. In modern times, the use of elephants as a means of punishment and execution is widely banned all around the world because it is considered an unethical practice. However, reports of this form of punishment persist in some areas of the world, particularly in regions affected by conflict and violence. It is important to note that using animals in any form of punishment or execution goes against the principles of animal welfare. Nowadays, these kinds of punishments are not used excessively, but in some parts of the world, people still follow these practices. And that brings us to the ending of today's video. If you liked it, do subscribe to our channel, The History of Torture, and leave a like on this video. Comment down below which method of execution and torture terrified you the most, and if you're interested in any more of our videos, do hit the bell icon to never miss out on any of our future content, and I will see you in the next one.